There was a woman in 1952 sitting at a small wooden vanity, the kind that barely fit inside a bedroom that had to double as a sewing room. No shelf of bottles, no heat tools, no color-coded system of cleansers and serums. Just a brush with natural bristles, a glass jar of cold cream, and a mirror that had probably been in the family since before the war. She brushed her hair slowly and deliberately, counting under her breath. When she was done, her hair sat in a way that looked like she had just come from a salon, and she had not left the house. That image sounds like nostalgia, but it is not. It is evidence. Women in the 1950s maintained some of the most recognizable hair in American history. Thick-shaped, shiny held, using items that cost almost nothing and required no professional instruction. They learned these habits from their mothers, who learned them from theirs. The routines were simple, daily, and effective. And then, over the course of about 2 decades, those routines quietly disappeared. Not because something better came along, because something more profitable did. The hair care industry did not grow by making hair healthier. It grew by making women believe their hair had a problem that only a product could solve. Once that belief was in place, the old habits, the ones that required no purchase, no subscription, no repeat visit to the beauty aisle, became invisible, not replaced, buried. That is what this video is about. Not magic, not miracle cures. Just the practical routines that worked, explained plainly, so you can decide what is worth bringing back. If you are new here, this channel is for people who want to understand how ordinary women of the past manage their homes, their health, and their appearance with far less than we carry around today. If that sounds like something you want more of, hit subscribe and tell us where you are watching from. Whether you are in a small town in the American South, somewhere in Canada, or watching from across the Atlantic, we want to know. And if someone in your family, a grandmother, a mother, an aunt, had a hair routine that seemed almost effortless, drop that in the comments too. You might be remembering exactly what we are about to talk about. Trick number 1. The 100 strokes, and why it was never just about shining. The 100-stroke brush rule is something most people have heard of and dismissed as an old wives' tale. It sounds decorative, like something a woman did while wearing a robe in an old film. But the stroke count was not about appearance. It was about function. A natural bristle brush, made from boar hair, which was the standard before synthetic brushes took over the market, does something no plastic bristle can replicate. It physically moves the scalp's natural oil, called sebum, from the root down through the length of the hair shaft. When a woman brushed her hair 100 times each evening, she was doing something closer to a conditioning treatment than a grooming habit. She was distributing her own body's moisture across every strand, from root to tip. The scalp produces oil for a reason. That oil is the hair's natural protector. It keeps strands from drying out, gives hair its natural sheen, and creates a light barrier against environmental damage. The problem is that sebum is heavy. Without brushing, it pools near the scalp, making roots look greasy while the mid-lengths and ends stay dry and brittle. The brush solved that imbalance without a single drop of product. When synthetic shampoos became the norm in the late 1950s and into the 1960s, daily or near-daily washing stripped sebum from the scalp faster than it could be replaced. The scalp responded the way skin always responds to being stripped. It overproduced. Suddenly, women had oily roots and dry ends at the same time. The industry had a product for that too, of course, and another one for the problem that product created. The evening brush did not just condition hair, it also stimulated blood flow to the scalp, which supports the follicle. It removed the small amount of dust and environmental debris that settled into hair through the day, reducing the need for frequent washing. And it kept hair trained, moving in the direction the woman wanted it to fall, without pins or spray. A good natural bristle brush still exists. It does not cost much. And used consistently each evening before bed, it does what it always did. The only thing that changed is that nobody told you about it. Trick number 2, the cold water finish. This one requires almost nothing and is probably the most immediately noticeable of the old tricks. After washing her hair, a 1950s woman would rinse with cold water as the final step. Not warm, cold. Cold enough that she probably winced slightly and got it done quickly. That final cold rinse was not a comfort ritual. It had a purpose. Hair is covered in a structure called the cuticle, a layer of tiny overlapping scales that run along the outside of each strand, similar to roof shingles. When hair is wet and warm, those scales lift open. That is why wet hair feels rough when you run a finger against the grain, and why it is more vulnerable to damage when warm. Cold water causes those scales to close and lie flat against the shaft. Flat cuticles reflect light evenly. That is what makes hair look shiny. It also means the strand is smoother, catches on less, and holds moisture inside rather than letting it evaporate. Hot water, and even warm water left as the final rinse, leaves cuticles raised. Raised cuticles make hair look dull, tangle more easily, and feel coarser. Every gloss serum and shine spray on the market today is attempting to do, with silicone and chemistry, what cold water does for free in 30 seconds. What cold water does for free in 30 seconds. Women in the 1950s did not have a name for the cuticle, but they knew the result, and the cold rinse was passed down as practical fact long before anyone could explain the biology behind it. Long before anyone could explain the biology behind it. Trick number 3. The scalp massage as a daily habit, not a spa appointment. The scalp massage has been repackaged so many times, as a luxury treatment, as a tool for growth serums, as something that costs $45 at a salon, that it no longer resembles what it originally was, a 2-minute daily habit, that women did with their own fingertips, usually while their hair was being brushed out or during a weekly wash. The principle is simple. The scalp, like all skin, benefits from circulation. Blood carries nutrients to the follicle. A follicle that is regularly stimulated by gentle movement has better circulation than one that is left entirely undisturbed beneath hair that is never touched except during washing. Women who worked the scalp with their fingertips each day, using small circular movements, starting at the temples and moving back, were not following a trend. They were maintaining the foundation of healthy hair in the most direct way possible. This habit required nothing. No oil was necessary, though some women used a small amount of olive oil or coconut oil during the weekly wash. No tool was required beyond the hands, and it took no more time than it takes to stand at a bathroom mirror and think through the morning. The industry does not profit from a woman using her own hands for 2 minutes. It profits from a woman buying a scalp massager, a growth serum to go with it, a follow-up treatment for sensitivity, and a clarifying shampoo to remove the product buildup. The habit, as the women of the 1950s practiced it, was its own complete system. The tools sold today are additions to something that was never missing in the first place. These 3 tricks, the brush, the cold rinse, the daily scalp habit, all share the same quality. They worked with the hair's own biology instead of overriding it. They prevented the problems that the modern industry now sells solutions for, and they cost in total almost nothing. That is exactly why they had to go. The average woman in the 1950s washed her hair once a week, sometimes less. That single fact, when you say it out loud today, tends to get one of 2 reactions. Either quiet recognition from someone who remembers their grandmother's Saturday night hair washing routine, or mild disbelief from someone who cannot imagine going more than 2 days without a wash. Both reactions make sense, but only one of them reflects what hair actually needs. The once-a-week wash was not a compromise forced by limited time or cold water plumbing. It was, for many women, a deliberate rhythm. Hair was washed, set, and then maintained through the week with brushing, pinning, and covering. The scalp was not stripped every morning and left to scramble for balance. It was allowed to regulate itself. And a scalp that is allowed to regulate itself over time produces less oil, not more. This is the part the modern industry never advertised. The more frequently you wash hair with a detergent-based shampoo, the more aggressively the scalp compensates by overproducing oil. The scalp reads the stripping as a threat and responds accordingly. Women who wash daily often feel they have no choice but to wash daily, because by the next morning the roots are oily again. That is not a hair type. That is a cycle. And it was created largely by the products designed to clean it. Did your mother or grandmother wash her hair only once a week? Drop it in the comments. Many people are surprised when they think back and realize that the women they remember as always looking put together were washing far less often than anyone does today. Trick number 4, training the scalp. The women who washed once a week were not tolerating oily hair between washes. Their scalps had been trained gradually and consistently to produce oil at a steadier and lower rate. The training happened simply by extending the time between washes, slowly, over several weeks, until the scalp recalibrated. This is not a complicated process. It requires patience more than anything else. In the early weeks of extending washes, the scalp does overproduce while it adjusts. Women in the 1950s managed this transition with dry methods, a light dusting of talcum powder or cornstarch at the roots, brushed through to absorb surface oil, and then brushed out again. The powder was worked in gently, left for a few minutes, and removed with the boar bristle brush. What remained was roots that lay flat and did not read as greasy from any reasonable distance. Dry shampoo, as it is sold today in aerosol cans with synthetic fragrances and various chemical carriers, is a direct commercial descendant of this habit. The difference is that the original version cost a few cents, left no residue that required a clarifying wash to remove, and did not add to the cycle of buildup and stripping that keeps women purchasing product after product. Cornstarch from the kitchen pantry did the same job with none of the additions. The scalp training habit also meant that when wash day did arrive, it was an event worth doing properly. Women did not rush through a 30-second lather. They took time with the scalp massage, rinsed thoroughly, and treated the wash as the week's one significant hair care moment. The care that went into that single wash was more deliberate than anything most people manage in 7 daily showers. Trick number 5, the lemon and vinegar rinse. Two things sat in nearly every 1950s kitchen that also had a place in the weekly hair routine: lemons and white vinegar. Both were used as a final rinse after shampooing, diluted heavily in water, and both worked on the same principle as the cold water rinse described earlier, restoring the hair's natural pH balance after washing. Hair and scalp sit at a slightly acidic pH, somewhere around 4.5 to 5.5 on the scale. Most soaps and early shampoos were alkaline, which is what made them effective at cleaning, but also what left the hair cuticle raised, rough, and prone to tangling after a wash. An acidic rinse, lemon juice in water, or a small amount of apple cider vinegar diluted in a full pitcher of cool water, brought the pH back down, smoothed the cuticle, and left hair noticeably easier to comb through. Women did not know the pH numbers. They knew that hair rinsed with a little lemon water or vinegar water dried shinier, felt softer, and held a set better than hair rinsed with plain tap water alone. The knowledge was passed down as practical fact without the chemistry lesson attached. The chemistry lesson came later, and when it did, it confirmed that the women were right. It should be said plainly here that lemon juice used frequently and left on the hair for extended periods can lighten it with sun exposure, and both lemon and vinegar, if used in concentration rather than heavily diluted, can irritate a sensitive scalp. The women of the 1950s used small amounts in a full pitcher of water, not poured directly from the bottle. The dilution matters, and anyone with scalp sensitivity should take that seriously before experimenting. That said, as a weekly finishing rinse in diluted form, this habit costs almost nothing and addresses the same problem that a shelf of pH balancing, cuticle smoothing, frizz controlling products attempts to solve today. The kitchen already had the answer. The beauty aisle was built on top of it. Trick number 6, pin curls and the heat-free set. Before hot rollers, before the curling iron, before the diffuser attachment and the ceramic barrel, and the temperature control dial, women set their hair with pins and patience. The pin curl was not a primitive version of heat styling. It was a different method entirely, one that worked with the hair's natural behavior rather than forcing a shape onto it through heat. A pin curl is made by wrapping a small section of damp hair into a flat coil against the scalp, then securing it with a single bobby pin. The hair dries in that coil. When the pins come out and the curls are brushed through, the result is a soft, even wave with body and hold that lasts considerably longer than most heat-styled results. The reason is straightforward. Hair that is shaped while wet and allowed to dry in that shape retains the memory of the shape far better than hair that is forced into a shape by heat and then released. Heat styling works by temporarily breaking and reforming the bonds inside the hair strand. The moment humidity touches heat-styled hair, those bonds begin to relax and the style drops. Hair shaped without heat, dried into a wave while the bonds are naturally pliable, holds its shape without that vulnerability. Women set their hair in pin curls on a Friday evening and slept in a silk or cotton scarf to protect the set. Saturday morning, the pins came out. With careful brushing, that wave lasted through the week. Refreshed lightly each morning with a brush and a little water on the palms. No heat touched the hair more than once, sometimes less. The hair did not suffer the daily protein damage that comes from repeated hot tool contact. It stayed stronger, held color longer for those who colored it, and broke less at the mid-shaft. The most common point of heat-related breakage today. The pin curl required bobby pins, damp hair, and 20 minutes of practice to master. Every tool needed is available for less than $2. What it required most was the willingness to plan a day ahead, which was, for women on a budget and a schedule, simply how things were done. Trick number 7, the once-a-week wash rhythm. Protected something that cannot be bought back easily. The washing rhythm that tied all of these habits together, the scalp training, the acid rinse, the pin curl set, protected something that is genuinely difficult to restore once it is gone, the hair's natural moisture balance. Hair that is washed too often, heat-styled daily, and treated with products that contain silicones and alcohols, eventually reaches a state where it can no longer hold moisture on its own. The cuticle is chronically raised, the natural oil barrier is permanently disrupted. The strand becomes dependent on external conditioning because its own ability to retain moisture has been compromised. Over years of stripping and coating, this is the condition that an entire sub-industry of bond-repairing treatments, protein masks, and moisture-locking serums now exist to address. The women of the 1950s did not have that problem to solve because they did not create it in the first place. The once-a-week rhythm, the acid rinse, the protective set, and the daily brush were not separate tricks. They were one system, each part supporting the others, all of it keeping the hair's own biology intact. That is what the washing rhythm protected, and it is what disappeared when the industry convinced an entire generation of women that clean hair meant washed this morning hair. There was a specific moment in American consumer history when the bar of soap at the bathroom sink stopped being the thing women used to wash their hair. It happened gradually through the late 1950s and accelerated into the 1960s as detergent-based liquid shampoos moved from novelty to standard. The shift was marketed as progress, cleaner, fresher, more modern. What it was, in practical terms, was a fundamental change in the chemistry touching millions of women's scalps every week. And then every other day. And then every morning. Soap, whatever its limitations, is made from natural fats and an alkali. It cleans, but it leaves a small amount of fatty residue on the hair shaft that acts as a very light conditioner. Early shampoos based on soap worked similarly. Detergent is different. Detergent was developed for industrial cleaning, for cutting grease from engines and factory floors. When it was reformulated for hair, it did what it was designed to do. It removed everything. The sebum, the residue, the natural fatty coating that kept the cuticle lying flat. It left the hair shaft chemically clean and physically stripped in a way that soap had never managed. The scalp had no preparation for this. Sebum production, which had been calibrated over a woman's lifetime to match a weekly wash cycle, suddenly faced a solvent arriving every 2 or 3 days. It could not keep up. The resulting dryness at the ends and overproduction at the roots. The condition so many women now accept as simply their hair type was not natural. It was induced, and the industry that induced it was perfectly positioned to sell the solution. Conditioner, as a separate product, became a mass-market item in the same era that detergent shampoo became standard. That is not a coincidence. It is a business model. Trick number 8, the egg and oil treatment. Before conditioner existed as a commercial product, women conditioned their hair with what the kitchen already contained. The most common treatment, and the one with the most direct parallel to what expensive modern masks attempt to replicate, was a simple mixture of egg and oil. An egg beaten with a small amount of olive oil, applied to damp hair from root to tip, left for 15 to 20 minutes, and then it was rinsed out with cool water. provided the hair with two things it genuinely needs: protein and moisture. The egg yolk contains lecithin and fatty acids that coat the hair shaft and temporarily fill in damage along the cuticle. The egg white contains protein that strengthens the strand. The olive oil, which has a molecular structure small enough to partially penetrate the hair shaft rather than just sitting on top of it, provided lasting moisture rather than a surface coating that washes away with the next shampoo. This treatment was done once a week, usually on wash day before the shampoo rather than after. Women applied it like a mask, covered their hair with a warm towel or a shower cap to hold in heat, and went about other tasks for the duration. It cost a fraction of a cent per use when eggs and olive oil were already in the house, which in the 1950s kitchen they almost always were. The modern equivalent, a professional bond-building treatment, a keratin mask, a protein reconstruction system, can run anywhere from $30 to $200 per application. The ingredient lists are longer, the packaging is more convincing. The fundamental chemistry being attempted is not entirely different from what an egg and a tablespoon of olive oil accomplish on a strand of hair that has been stripped by detergent shampoo and daily heat. It should be noted that the egg treatment should always be rinsed with cool water, never hot. Hot water will cook the egg in the hair, which creates a mess that is considerably harder to remove than the original problem. Women who knew this trick knew that detail too, because it was passed down alongside the method. The instructions and the caution came together, as they always do when knowledge travels from person to person, rather than appearing on the back of a bottle. Trick number 9. The silk scarf overnight method. The silk or satin scarf that women tied over their hair each night before bed was not a fashion affectation or a cultural symbol unique to any one group, though it was certainly common across many. It was a practical hair preservation tool used widely among women who had set their hair for the week and needed that set to last. Cotton pillowcases absorb moisture and create friction. A strand of hair moving against cotton fabric all night loses moisture at the cuticle level and emerges in the morning with raised, roughened scales. The physical cause of frizz and of the dull, flattened look that requires restyling. A silk or satin surface creates almost no friction. Hair slides across it rather than catching. The cuticle stays flat, the set stays intact. The moisture the hair held the night before is still there in the morning. Women who set their hair in pin curls on Friday evening and slept in a scarf woke on Saturday with a style that required only light brushing to open into waves. Women who maintained a blowout or a pressed style through the week protected it each night the same way, and it lasted considerably longer than the same style worn against cotton and redone daily with heat. The silk bonnet and the satin pillowcase have both been rediscovered in recent years and are now sold as hair care products at prices ranging from reasonable to absurd. What was being sold is not new. It is the same principle that a woman in 1954 understood when she folded a square of silk fabric over her pin curls before lying down. The fabric existed already. The habit cost nothing beyond the initial purchase of a single scarf that would last for years. Trick number 10. Finishing with cool air and a natural bristle brush. Heat to style and cool to set is a principle understood by anyone who has used a curling iron with a cool shot button. But in the 1950s, the cool finish was not a feature of a styling tool. It was the entire method. Women who did use heat, usually from a hooded dryer at the salon or a handheld dryer at home, finished the drying process by removing heat entirely and letting hair cool completely before touching it. While still warm, hair is at its most pliable and most vulnerable. Styling a section that is still hot and then moving on means the heat-softened bonds are re-solidifying in a disturbed position. Waiting for hair to cool before brushing allows the bonds to lock in the shape rather than collapsing it. After cooling, a natural bristle brush was used in long, smooth strokes. Not aggressive backcombing, not rapid scrubbing at the roots. Long, smooth strokes from the scalp downward, following the direction the hair was meant to fall. This motion closed the cuticle further, distributed any remaining natural oil, and gave the finished style its surface shine without a single drop of serum or spray. Women who did not have access to a dryer at all, and many did not, particularly early in the decade, simply allowed hair to air dry completely before brushing out the set. The result depended on the setting method, not on heat. The heat was never the point. Shape and patience were. Which of these tricks would you actually try first? And tell us where you are watching from. Whether you are somewhere in the American Midwest, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, or anywhere else, it matters to know where this is landing and whether any of these habits ring a bell from someone you grew up watching. Trick number 11, rosemary water as a finishing rinse. Rosemary has been used in hair care as a traditional practice across many cultures for a very long time, and it appeared in the 1950s, American household most commonly as a rinse. A simple preparation of rosemary steeped in hot water, cooled, strained, and poured through the hair as a final step after washing. Women used it for the same reasons the herb had always been associated with hair. The belief that it supported scalp health, that it left hair smelling clean without artificial fragrance, and that it added a subtle shine that plain water did not. Whether it was also used as a kitchen herb by the same woman who kept it in the bathroom cabinet was very likely. Rosemary was an ordinary household item, not a specialty ingredient. It should be said clearly that rosemary water used as a rinse is a traditional practice, not a medically confirmed hair growth treatment. It should not replace any professional care for hair loss or scalp conditions. What it is, used simply and consistently as part of a washing routine, is a fragrant, gentle, inexpensive finishing step that leaves hair smelling clean and the scalp feeling refreshed. Nothing more needs to be claimed for it. In a routine already built on cold rinses and weekly washing, a rosemary steep costs almost nothing and adds a sensory element to wash day that makes the whole habit feel worth repeating. The rosemary rinse, like the lemon rinse and the vinegar rinse before it, represents something the 1950s kitchen offered almost by accident. A cabinet full of hair care that nobody had to buy separately, label, or market. It was just what was already there, used by women who had been taught to waste nothing, including what the pantry had to offer. The women who kept these habits were not operating from a philosophy. They were not making a statement about the beauty industry or resisting consumer culture on principle. They were simply doing what had been shown to them by their mothers, by their aunts, by the older woman next door who always seemed to have her hair in order without visible effort. The knowledge moved the way most useful domestic knowledge moved in that era, person to person, hand to hand, across kitchen tables and bathroom doorways, without being written down or packaged or sold. That is exactly why it was so easy to interrupt. When a generation of women was told through advertising that was sophisticated enough to feel like information, that their old habits were inadequate, that modern science had produced something better, cleaner, more effective, many of them believed it. Why would they not? The products were everywhere, the messaging was relentless, and the results were convincing enough in the short term that the long-term cost to the hair's natural balance did not become obvious, until the habits that could have prevented it were already gone. The tricks in this final section are the ones that were buried most efficiently, because they were the most difficult to replace with a product equivalent. They required no ingredient at all, or they used something so ordinary that building a market around it was nearly impossible. They survived, where they survived, in the memory of women who simply never stopped doing them. Trick number 12, dry brushing the scalp. Dry brushing the scalp is different from the evening brush stroke routine described earlier. That habit moved oil through the length of the hair. This one worked on the scalp surface itself, and it was done in the morning, before any styling, on hair that had not been recently washed. Using a soft, natural bristle brush, softer than the one used for long strokes through the hair, women would work the scalp in small sections, using short, light strokes directly against the skin. The purpose was to lift and remove the dead skin cells that accumulate on the scalp between washes, to stimulate blood circulation at the follicle, and to prevent the kind of buildup that leads to itching, flaking, and dullness at the root. The modern answer to scalp buildup is a clarifying shampoo, a scalp scrub, or an exfoliating treatment, all of which require washing, and all of which, if used with a detergent shampoo, restart the stripping cycle. The dry brush addressed the same problem without water, without product, and without disturbing the sebum balance that the weekly wash rhythm worked to maintain. It was a maintenance habit in the truest sense, small, regular, preventative, and invisible in its results precisely because it stopped the problem before it started. Women who did this consistently rarely complained of the itchy, tight scalp feeling that sends people toward medicated shampoos today. The scalp, like the skin on the rest of the body, benefits from regular surface clearing. The dry brush did that in 2 minutes on a Tuesday morning, without anything coming off a shelf. Trick number 13, the paper bag curl method. This one requires a moment of context because it sounds at first like the kind of folk remedy that belongs more to legend than to a working routine. It is neither. The paper bag curl was a real and practical method used particularly among women who had no access to pin curl clips, foam rollers, or salon equipment, and who still needed a reliable wave in their hair for the week ahead. Narrow strips of brown paper bag, the kind that came home from the grocery store every week, were cut or torn to a length of several inches and a width of about half an inch. A section of damp hair was wrapped around the strip, and the strip was tied in a simple knot to hold the curl in place. The hair dried around the paper, and when the strips were removed, the result was a soft, rounded curl, similar to what a foam roller produces today. The paper had two properties that made it functional rather than merely improvised. It was absorbent, which meant it drew a small amount of moisture away from the hair as it dried. This natural absorption was the key to accelerating the hair's setting time, and it was soft enough to sleep on without the hard pressure points that pin curl clips create against the scalp. Women who could not afford rollers or who had used their pins elsewhere reached for the grocery bag without much thought about it. It was a solution made from something that would have been thrown away. Foam rollers, which became the standard tool for heat-free setting, cost money and require storage. A paper bag, in the 1950s American household, was simply what arrived when you bought groceries. The method worked. It asked nothing of the household budget, making it a truly free alternative to expensive new products. And it disappeared not because rollers worked better, but because rollers could be manufactured, massively marketed, and sold to a generation of new consumers. Trick number 14, the light oil seal before bed. The last trick in this series is the simplest, and possibly the one most directly buried by the conditioning product industry. Before the invention of leave-in conditioners, hair serums, overnight masks, and heat protection sprays, women who wanted to protect their hair while they slept applied a very small amount of natural oil to the ends of the hair, just the ends, where the strand is oldest and most fragile, before tying their scarf and going to bed. Olive oil was common, coconut oil, where it was available. Castor oil, which had a long history of household use for both skin and hair, was applied by some women in even smaller amounts to the hairline and edges. The principle is the same one that every overnight hair treatment on the market today claims to operate on, sealing moisture into the hair shaft. During the hours when the body is at rest and repair is naturally occurring. The commercial version adds fragrance, silicones, various proteins, and a price point. The original version was a drop of oil on the fingertips, worked gently into the last 2 inches of the hair. That was all. Women were careful not to use too much. Too much oil makes hair look greasy and weighs down a set. The discipline of using very little, barely enough to feel on the fingertips, was part of the method. It is also the part that tends to get lost when people try to revive the habit, because the instinct is to use more of something, when the result is not immediately visible. The women who taught this habit taught the quantity alongside it. A drop, not a palmful, a drop. Why these habits disappeared said plainly. The hair care industry did not bury these tricks because they failed. They were buried because they worked, and because they worked without requiring a purchase. A woman who brushes her hair each evening with a natural bristle brush, washes once a week, finishes with a cold rinse and a diluted lemon rinse, sets her hair without heat, sleeps in a silk scarf, seals the ends with a drop of oil, and massages her scalp with her fingertips each morning, has a complete hair care system. It costs in total almost nothing beyond the initial brush. It addresses oiliness, dryness, breakage, dullness, and loss of style. The 5 problems that the modern hair care aisle is almost entirely organized around solving. That system cannot be monetized. Individual pieces of it have been extracted, repackaged, and sold back. The dry shampoo, the silk bonnet, the scalp massager, the overnight serum, but the system as a whole, practiced consistently as a daily and weekly rhythm, produces results that give the industry very little room to enter. The women who practiced these habits were not sophisticated consumers of beauty culture. They were practical people who learned from other practical people, who had neither the money nor the inclination to buy a separate product for every problem their hair might present. They treated the hair the way they treated the household, with consistent small habits, applied regularly, that prevented large problems from developing in the first place. That is the actual lesson here. Not that the 1950s were a golden age of beauty, not that modern products are worthless without exception. The lesson is that consistency and simplicity, applied to the right habits at the right time, does what no single product can. It keeps the hair's own biology working in its favor instead of against it. Go back to the woman at the wooden vanity, the small bedroom, the natural bristle brush, the glass jar of cold cream on the left side, and the single bottle of diluted lemon water on the right. She is counting strokes under her breath, not because she is being precise, but because the counting is the habit, and the habit is the point. Her daughter is watching from the doorway, not taking notes, just watching. The way children absorb routines before they are old enough to call them routines. In 10 years, that daughter will stand at her own mirror and do the same thing, without entirely remembering where she learned it. That is how knowledge was kept. And that is how it was lost, when the vanity was replaced with products, and the routine had been replaced with a shopping list. The habits are not gone. They are waiting to be picked up again, by someone who noticed that the old way was never actually broken. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. There is more where this came from, in the daily rhythms that kept things steadier than anything we have managed to buy since.